Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and we are continuing our study of the Olivet Discourse. We've been focused on Matthew 25:31 and following for a good long while, and I just simply want to drive home the interconnectedness between Matthew 25:31 and following, the entirety of the Olivet Discourse in reality, and all of these passages, such as 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, that can be demonstrated so easily and so powerfully to be fulfilled, predicted to be fulfilled in the first century in the judgment of Old Covenant Israel for persecuting Jesus's followers. It has nothing whatsoever to do with an end of time, end of the Christian age. It's all about the end of the Old Covenant age, not the end of the Christian age, which has no end. Okay, now, yesterday we went back over the correlations between Isaiah 66, Matthew 25:31, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, 2 Peter 3, and the book of Revelation. Now, I just want to focus on something this morning. It's a tiny bit of a divergent, but not all that much. Because you see, when people start talking about the new creation, and you start talking about that being fulfilled in AD 70, they very often look around and they're going, what are you talking about? You know, because at the coming of the Lord in flaming fire of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 or of Isaiah chapter 66, there's not going to be any more sin. There's not going to be any more evangelism. God's going to wipe away all the sin. Just recently, Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier produced a couple of 3 or 4 videos attacking covenant eschatology, i.e. the full preterist view. One of the arguments they made, and of course you have to understand it's absolutely critical for both the amillennial, postmillennial, even dispensational view, is that in the new creation there is no more sin. There is no evangelism in the new heaven and the new earth. Hang on to that, folks. Well, you see, Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66, and by the way, Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier, they made those 4 videos. Well, Michael Solomon, my good friend, by the way, who was in North Carolina, and we got to go out to eat together on Sunday before we came back home. So it was great to see Michael in person. Been a long time since I got to see him in person. And got to meet his lovely wife. So anyway, Michael and I have also made 4 videos responding to Sam Frost and Jeremiah in their videos. One of the things that we pointed out was Sam Frost says that, well, the promise of the new heaven and new earth of Isaiah 65, he totally ignores chapter 66, by the way. But he said, one of the things, it talks about children being born. It talks about people dying. It talks about people working, planting vineyards, and eating the fruit of their vineyards. And Sam Frost says, well, the New Testament writers pick up on that, and they completely distort it. They change it to where there are no more children, and there's no more death. And of course, he believes there's no more evangelism. So he takes Isaiah 65, turns it up on its head, and whereas Isaiah 65 talks about children being born, Sam Frost says no. In the new creation, there are no more children being born. Whereas Isaiah 65 says there is death, Sam Frost turns it on its head and says There is no more death. And of course, he appeals to Revelation chapter 21, no more death. Well, folks, what you need to understand about that is Revelation chapter 21, 3 and 4, when it says there is no more death, it is not used anatherosly, that is, without the definite article. It is literally, there is no more the death inside the city. It's not just death generically. It is no more the death inside the city. Frost totally ignored that. And again, he and Jeremiah completely and totally ignored Isaiah chapter 66, which is what I want to focus on this morning. In Isaiah chapter 66, you have the judgment of the persecutors of God's people, those who would cast out God's people, which meant them casting out of the synagogues. I know the word synagogue, and I know the term casting them out of the synagogue is not found there, but casting them out is found. Okay? So, in this passage of the coming of the Lord, in flaming fire against the persecutors of God's people, guess what would happen? Well, Isaiah 66, 17 and 19 tells us that at that time, the survivors of the day of the Lord. Now look, folks, survivors of the day of the Lord in flaming fire? Yeah, survivors of the day of the Lord. What would happen to these survivors? Now, these are the righteous. Okay? And the Lord says he would take some of them and make them to be Levites. Now, in the first place, you got to catch the revolutionary nature of what God is saying. How do you take someone who is not a Levite and you make them to be a Levite? You're going to change their DNA? No. What's at stake here, ladies and gentlemen? What is at issue is God was going to create a new priesthood. A different priesthood. Not based on genealogy. Not based on blood. Not based on race. I will take take them, the survivors, make them to be Levites. Well, you see, we come to the New Testament, and we come to Peter, who is writing to the diaspora of Israel, and he says, you therefore, as living stones, are being built up a habitation for God through the Spirit, as a spiritual priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices, which are wholly acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. A new priesthood. Just like John said, Revelation chapter 1 verse 5 and following. God has made us, John said, to be a kingdom of priests. A kingdom of priests. You see what God was promising in Isaiah chapter 66 is a radical change in the covenantal world. Whereas under the old covenant, only Levites were allowed to offer the sacrifice, and only a purified Levite was allowed to go into the most holy place and there to make atonement on the day of atonement. Under the new covenant, we have Christ, of whom it is obviously obvious that Christ sprang out of Judah, of which Moses spake nothing concerning the priesthood. Hebrews 7 verse 14. How can Jesus be a priest? Well, if he were on earth, he could not serve as a priest in the temple because he's not a Levite. And because there are priests who serve according to the law. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 4 and 5. In other words, they're Levites serving under the law of Moses. And Jesus could not be a priest on earth if the law of Moses is in effect. But you see, Jesus' priesthood was a priesthood after the power of an endless life. He was a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Do you catch the power of that? This is awesome. And guess what? Those who are Christ's are priests. Those who are followers of Christ are priests. It's absolutely fascinating. In Isaiah chapter 60, and I've said this on many occasions, there are passages in the Old Testament that are so radical in what they say. If we have eyes to see. In Isaiah chapter 60, in the prediction of the new in the prediction of the new heaven and the new earth, in the prediction of the new Jerusalem, like Isaiah 66 predicted, the new heaven and the new earth, just like Isaiah 65 foretold, the new heaven and the new earth. So in Isaiah chapter 60, in the new Jerusalem, i.e. in the new heaven and the new earth, guess what would happen? People from far off, distant lands who were not Levites, they would ascend the altar of God to offer up acceptable sacrifices. What? These aren't Levites either. But just like Isaiah 66 said, that after the day of the Lord, in flaming fire, he would take some survivors and make them to be Levites to offer up acceptable sacrifice. Folks, do you see how we're not waiting on the new creation? We are not waiting on, in other words, if you accept the fact that every Christian, as a child of God, is a priest unto God to offer up, kind of like Hebrews chapter 13, verse 15 says, by him, that's through Jesus Christ, who is the chief priest, after the order of Melchizedek, by him, therefore, let us offer up the sacrifice of praise unto God, that is the fruit of our lips. See, we all, as children of God, are priests of God to offer up sacrifice. But we don't offer bulls and goats because you see, the time that Isaiah 66 foretold, in which the man who would offer a bull would be as the same as he would as if he killed a man. Why? Because God never had pleasure in those things, ever. But the fruit of our lips, the sanctification of our hearts and our minds, as living sacrifices unto God, acceptable through Jesus Christ, Romans 12, 1 and 2. That means we are in the new heaven and earth because in AD 70, God swept away the old Levitical priesthood. And what he left was the new covenant priesthood of Jesus Christ. We don't have to wait for a fulfillment of Matthew 25, 31 and following to bring in the new creation in order to have the new priesthood. And there's even more. I'll see you on the flip side.